My wife and I attended a fancy celebration a few weeks ago. The party was sponsored by her company, DidSheReally Consulting Inc., highlighting a recent accomplishment by one of the firm's older executives. It was an expensive affair, held at the ballroom of a local Hilton hotel. As usual at this type of event, my wife was dressed appropriately in a classic little black dress, sleeveless and short to display her lovely legs. I wore a plain dark blue suit with a white shirt and tie, which seemed to be the uniform of many of the men in attendance. We made the rounds as we entered the huge room. I have to admit I was impressed by how many people were there. It seemed there were over 200 people there already, and more arriving every minute. I knew that DidSheReally Consulting was in a very successful business. It was clear it had grown quickly over the past year, but I never expected there would be hundreds of employees and their guests in the huge, beautifully decorated ballroom. Sarah had worked for DidSheReally for over a decade, so I knew a few of her coworkers from past parties. We entered the party as many people greeted her and smiled in recognition. She seemed to know everyone, and as we made the rounds, Sarah introduced me to her friends from work that I didn't know. When the host of the event asked for everyone to take their seats, we took our assigned seats at a large round table near the front. As soft music played over the speaker system, we spoke with the people at our table. Most were younger than us, but they seemed friendly, and soon I was having a good time chatting with people, while listening to my wife interacting with the people she knew from work. After a delicious steak dinner, Sarah and I sat through a few boring speeches which praised the honored older man's efforts in securing some valuable contract. Once the formalities were finished, no doubt to enable the firm to write off the evening's cost as a business expense, the CEO of Sarah's firm welcomed the gathering and invited everyone to enjoy the evening dancing to the band and drinking from the free bar in the corner of the room. The band started out with a few classic songs, and I was glad of that. I was afraid they would start playing some annoying music, but thankfully they didn't. As the band started playing a slow song I recognized, I took my wife's hand and whispered in her ear, "Shall we dance, my dear?" Sarah looked around to make sure we weren't the first to break the ice. Then she nodded with a smile, and I escorted my attractive wife out to the dance floor. There were already a dozen couples dancing, so we just blended in with them. We attended events like this many times during our 14-year marriage. My company sponsored a few parties a year, although none as extravagant as this luxurious ballroom. With the growth of Sarah's company, they were having events like this several times a year. Some were simple department celebrations at a local bar and grill for happy hour. Others were expensive events, such as this big party. Sarah considered the frequent celebrations a benefit of her employment and also a chance to network with other important people in her firm. I just tagged along and enjoyed the free food and drink. During the evening, Sarah and I were together most of the time. However, there were times when she was asked to dance by other men, and she usually accepted. I didn't mind because our relationship was strong. We both knew that cheating was completely unacceptable to both of us. After discussing it early in our marriage, the subject hardly ever came up again. I could tell that my wife was enjoying herself, and I was glad. Even in her 40s, my slim blonde wife had a nice figure and enjoyed dancing. She was still an attractive woman, and I loved her, even if she's a bit of a flirt. I saw her flirting as harmless and always assumed she'd attract attention whenever we went out in public. I'm 2 years younger than my 42-year-old wife and still in good shape, so I was never jealous of her having a good time, even if she was dancing with other people. However, later into the night, my happy attitude was shaken a little by something I noticed. Sarah had returned from the dance floor a few minutes earlier. She was sweating a little and was sipping her drink as we both sat silently watching the dancers on the floor. It was during that silent interlude that I felt a presence emerge from the crowded floor and advanced directly to our table. Over the loud music, a tall, rather large man walked up to us and smiled at my wife. Then he smiled at my wife and silently held out his hand as if expecting her to immediately respond to his wordless offer. I was caught a little off guard by his confident gesture. As I turned to my wife to ask who this man was, I found her gazing up at him with a warm smile on her face. Immediately, my instincts kicked in. I hadn't seen that look in quite a while, but I was very familiar with it. That look is supposed to be reserved for her husband, alone. I had seen it directed at me when we were first married, but early in our marriage I had noticed that look of admiration on Sarah's face at one of the after-work parties we attended. It was directed at some young guy she knew, who I later found out she was having a close friendship with. A few weeks after that party, when I caught her with that look, I was very suspicious. That night we were at a bar and met up with her friends, and that same guy was there too. That night I noticed her drinking more than normal. When he asked her to dance, she again flashed that damn look of admiration as he accompanied her to the dance floor. I watched her closely and found her dancing way too closely with him. I pretended to drink too much and acted like I was nearly passing out as they flirted together. Later, when she thought I was too drunk to notice, she snuck off with him using a back entrance. I found her in the guy's car being with him. I didn't know how far they had gone or how far she intended to go. Probably all the way, I suppose. I let her continue her activities and simply confronted her when she got home. I made it clear that I intended to break up with her if she didn't end that friendship. She was shocked that I knew what she had done. She was also very apologetic and promised never to do that again. She said she loved me, and that this guy was just a fun distraction, someone she knew from her past. She claimed he was just a friend she flirted with and got caught up in it, and let it go too far. She said they never went beyond a friendship, that she had already ended it and it would never happen again. I guess I believed her, but had a difficult time forgiving her. Also, the trust I had in her was definitely damaged. Our marriage was Sarah's second marriage, as her short first marriage ended in divorce. This was my first time tying the knot, and I was surprised she could disregard our marriage vows and behave this way. We did go to counseling, but it still took several months of therapy to get our marriage back on track. Now that look of admiration was back on her face, and it wasn't meant for me. I watched helplessly as Sarah reached out her hand with that same yearning, admiring look on her face. It wasn't exactly a smile. Her face was beaming though, and her thin lips were twisted in a subtle half-smile. As she gazed at him, her blue eyes were twinkling. She eagerly accepted his request as she took his hand, rose from her seat, and without once looking at me left the table with him. As I sat there feeling quite left out, the big man possessively held her hand and with a triumphant look, escorted my star-struck wife out onto the dance floor. I pulled my eyes away from them long enough to glance around the table and found the other couples just as interested as I was in what happened. It was a very awkward moment. I glanced around for some explanation from my table mates and found that none of them wanted to make eye contact with me. The couple next to me immediately got up and went to the bar. The woman next to me suddenly pulled her husband to his feet and led him out on the dance floor. I shot a few of them questioning glances to some who were still seated and realized very quickly that no one was going to clear up my confusion. I felt a pang of jealousy rise up inside me, but forced it down. I tried to rationalize my feelings, telling myself that my suspicions were absurd. Sarah loved me and I loved her. She had danced with other people all night. Other than that one mistake years ago, she had been a good, faithful wife and partner. I was positive she wouldn't do anything to jeopardize our marriage again. Surely after all these years she had learned that I would never accept any inappropriate behavior. For a moment my jealousy subsided. I took solace in the fact that we had built a strong, loving marriage over the years. But as I watched my slender, middle-aged wife dancing a fast song with her tall partner, I couldn't help noticing her adoring glances up at his face. Sarah is a good dancer, and her slim body moving gracefully around the tall man had drawn many people's attention. When the song ended, I breathed a sigh of relief. I expected her to thank the man for the dance, as she had done all night, and return to my side and the privacy of our table. Instead, as the next song came on, the man pulled my smiling wife into a close embrace, for the next song was a slow, romantic one. It was obvious that neither of them had any intention of ending their dance. I wanted to go out and interrupt them. But I eventually decided to just let this play out. Her actions proved that she cared little about my opinion. As the man held her against his body, I noticed that his hands had drifted close to her back. She didn't object to his embrace or wandering hands at all. On the contrary, she seemed to be enjoying herself very much. It was obvious she only had admiring eyes for her tall dance partner. I was upset, but knew if she was doing something inappropriate again, I would find out soon enough. As the song continued, Sarah and her partner slowly drifted further into the crowded dance floor. I could no longer see them, but had suspicions that whatever they were doing wasn't something she wanted me to see. When that song ended, another slow song started right away. As I expected, Sarah never came back. In fact, it was 5 more songs before the crowded dance floor thinned out, and I saw my flushed, giggling wife, still in a tight embrace, dancing with her friend. As I waited impatiently for her return, some of the couples at my table returned. They were still glancing sheepishly at me and acted like they were embarrassed about something. Unable to wait, I turned to the woman next to me and asked, "Who is the tall guy that Sarah is dancing with?" I knew the woman worked with Sarah. She looked a bit agitated at my question. She cast me what I can only describe as a look of sympathy before her expression softened. Then she sighed in resignation and answered my question. "That's Mr. Jackson," the woman told me. "He's the new assistant director of sales that started with the firm a few months ago." "Jackson, huh? Does he have a first name?" "Trevon. Trevon Jackson," she answered, adding, "Sarah works for him now." "He's her boss?" I blurted out with surprise. I wondered why my wife never told me about this. "How long has she worked for him?" "I think it's been a few months." The woman said, "Probably since he started working here. He's some ex-college athlete, football I think. He was sent from another office and seems to be a favorite of the CEO. Since he's been here, he's taken over another department and seems to be on a fast track to upper management." The woman then said she had to use the ladies' room and excused herself. I think she just wanted to get away from me before I questioned her further. The music was still playing, this time a fast song. When I scanned the dance floor, which had thinned out considerable, but I couldn't see Sarah anywhere. Then I glanced around the room and spotted her at a table across from the dance floor, sitting at Mr. Jackson's table. She had left me alone so she could join her friend. I was upset. There were several other couples at the table with them. Several black men and 3 white, giggling females. Sarah was laughing too at some amusing story that Jackson was telling the group. I made my way over to the table. There were empty shot glasses all around the large table, so I knew they were drinking, probably a lot. I could hear my wife saying something, and it sounded like she was slurring her words. As I approached them, Sarah saw me coming and her laughing suddenly stopped. "Hi, honey," she called out as I grew closer. Her flushed face took on a more sober expression as she asked, "Are you having fun, Carl? Sorry to leave you alone, darling." "I'm just having a drink with my friends. Have you met Trevon yet?" I wasn't sure how to behave. Should I act like a clueless husband and just ignore her dismissive attitude toward me? Or should I make a scene, call her out in front of her so-called friends and her arrogant boss? I decided to take a middle road and acted a bit stiff as I regarded her with a passive, curious expression. "No, I haven't." With a chagrined look, Sarah rose and moved to my side. She introduced me to her friends at the table. They didn't get up, and not one of them shook my hand. They all just waved and seemed quite amused by my presence. When she got around to introducing Jackson, the guy just squeezed my hand overly hard and with barely a nod in my direction and went back to ignoring me. The young woman next to him noticed the veiled insult and giggled. Without reacting to his insult, I announced, "Well, it's getting late, Sarah. I'm tired now, and I'm ready to leave." Sarah was clearly surprised and irritated. Locking eyes with her, I asked, "Are you coming, dear?" "Now, already?" she exclaimed, sounding a little drunk. "Yes, it's past midnight. I'm leaving right now." With a frown, she said, "I don't want to leave yet, Carl. It's still early. Why don't you go back to our table and I'll join you in a few? I want to talk to Trevon for a few minutes about something." Trevon, I thought suspiciously. Not Mr. Jackson. She's sure acting friendly to a guy that she's working for. After ignoring me, dancing with him for the last half hour, and then drinking a shot or two at their table. It didn't seem like a normal business relationship. I was getting more upset. But instead of venting my frustration, I just shrugged and shot her a dismissive look. "Do what you want, Sarah. But I'm leaving." As I spun around and walked away, I could hear snickering behind me. Somebody said, laughing, "Just let him go, Sarah. I'll give you a ride home." I had my keys in my hand as I made my way rapidly toward the exit. Sarah's purse was still at our table. I knew she had to retrieve it before she left, so I was nearly at the parking lot when I heard my wife's high heels behind me clattering on the pavement. "Oh no, Carl." "Wait," she cried angrily. She finally caught up, grabbed my arm, and tried to pull me around. I nearly yanked her arm off as I pulled away from her grasp. I walked so fast to her car that she had a hard time keeping up in her high heels. "Just get in," I told her gruffly as I opened my door. I unlocked her door after sliding behind the wheel. Usually I'd open her door first as a gentleman should, but tonight I was too upset and just waited until she trotted around the car, opened her own door, and slid into her seat. "That was so rude," she cried in a shrill tone. "What the heck's the matter with you, Carl? Everybody was laughing at how you behaved. I have to work with those people, you know. It's not even that late yet, and the band is still playing. What's wrong anyway?" I didn't want to tell her that my suspicions were tripped when I noticed her look of attraction for her jerk boss. I just mumbled something that I was tired, and I wasn't having a very good time watching her dancing with other guys. She complained about my impolite behavior for a while. But when she saw that I wasn't going to discuss the matter with her, she dropped it, and we spent the rest of the ride home in tense silence. That night was the beginning of our problems. For the rest of the weekend, Sarah acted upset with me. We didn't speak very much. I did ask her why she never told me she now worked for an obnoxious young guy. She frowned, and her bitter response proved she didn't appreciate me belittling her new boss. I guess she held the jerk in much higher regard than I did. During the next week, things improved a little. Sarah was still not going to admit that she had a crush on her boss, but I knew from that look that she did. She said she'd been moved into his department to work as his assistant and didn't mention him because she didn't think I was interested in something so trivial. She was probably right about that, but that was before I saw her look of attraction and the way the two were dirty dancing that night at the hotel. Things settled down over the next couple of weeks. We had our moments, but there was no real emotion in it. I hoped Sarah would realize how much I cared for her and would respect my feelings about cheating. "You're just being childish, Carl," she accused me. "I have always danced with other men at parties, and you never minded before." "Your boss is different," I replied. "You two weren't dancing like friends that night. His hands were wandering a little too much, and you didn't seem to mind one bit." "Oh, you poor man." She laughed. "Maybe I did let him touch my behind. But so what? It meant nothing. Just a bit of fun, you know. You sound so darn insecure. Are you going to be jealous every time I dance with some guy now?" "No, just him. I don't like the way he acts around you." "You mean because he's an attractive younger man that notices I'm not so old or so bad looking?" She snapped back at me. "Or is it some racial thing you don't like him because he's black?" Her insolent smirk was hard to take. She knew very well that I was no racist. I just hated to see her acting like a love-struck teenager around some arrogant person that seemed to be interested in getting into her heart. "That has nothing to do with it," I said, barely keeping control. "Well, whatever has you all charged up, you better get over it. I've been working for Trevon for over 2 months now, and he's been a great boss. He's made it very clear that he appreciates my work. He gave me a bonus last month and has even put me up for a raise." That was news. Before I could react to that, she added quickly, "Oh, and by the way, Carl, I'm scheduled to go on a customer visit with Trevon and 2 other sales reps the week after next." "Really?" I snorted. "Less than 2 weeks from now. That's pretty short notice, don't you think?" "When did old Trevon plan that trip, my dear?" "The other night when you were dancing with him. It's been in the works for a while," she admitted. "I was going to tell you after the party, but you were moping around like a jerk, so I didn't. I've been waiting until you got over your little snit to let you know." "So you and Trevon are off together, huh? That's convenient." I shot back. "I guess you two will have lots of time to chat and dance while you're away from your boring old husband. How long will this trip last anyway?" Sarah gave me a disappointed look and said, "We leave Wednesday and I think we get back Sunday morning." "A whole weekend. Why don't you come back Friday night?" "We have important meetings with the customer on Saturday. I think they're going to sign a big contract with us, and Trevon is going to be the lead representative for our company. It's a big deal, and he says he needs me there to assist with things." "Oh no. Doe. Bay. Can't you see that jerk is just trying to manipulate you? I could tell by the way she acted he's just another person trying to use you for their benefit. No, he's not. You're just acting like an insecure fool." "A fool, huh? Tell you what, my loving wife, I want you to go to work tomorrow and ask HR for a transfer out of his department. He's just setting you up for trouble, and I won't stand by and do nothing while he messes up our marriage." Her eyes widened in surprise. I don't think she expected that. I will not. "You're crazy, Carl. This is the best job I ever had. I won't give it up." "Oh no? That's right. Forget it. I'm not quitting just so you'll feel better. You better get over this jealous attitude right now. I'm making more money than ever, and I'm not leaving my job. Trevon is treating me with the respect I deserve, and I'm not doing anything to mess it up. You better not either." That declaration ended our discussion. I tried complaining some more, but Sarah wouldn't listen and just shut me out. She walked out of the house, her purse in her hand, went to her car and started to drive off. I chased her outside. "Where are you going?" I shouted. "We're not finished." "Oh, yes, we are. I'm going out to dinner with Mary until you stop being so insecure," she told me bitterly. "I'll give you time to get your head out of the clouds, and maybe we can talk then." As she left in a huff, I slumped down in my recliner feeling depressed. How quickly our relationship had turned into arguing and suspicions. Was she going to start lying to me again? I still remember the old saying, once a liar, always a liar. But after so many years together, I could hardly believe she was going to mess up again. Of course, I didn't actually catch her doing anything inappropriate many years ago. But she certainly behaved like she did. Now that I'd seen her with her boss, giving him that look that was reserved for me, I didn't trust her one bit, and she made it clear she didn't care what I thought. I guess the usual next step is for the suspicious spouse to hire a private investigator to put video cameras in her hotel room to get the evidence of her wrongdoing. Then using that evidence go to a lawyer and take legal action against her for every cent I could get. Afterward, I should reveal my martial arts training and challenge her boss to a fight and beat him up. Unfortunately for me, I didn't have the funds to hire an expensive pie. I wasn't a trained SEAL and had no army buddies to take him out. I also never took any martial arts training. In fact, I haven't had a serious physical fight since I was in middle school. But I knew that despite my lack of resources to punish my wife and her colleague, I wasn't going to stay married to a dishonest person. I only had my suspicions so far, but the disrespectful way he behaved toward me was no illusion. I knew that look of desire on her face was proof something was going on in her head. If she hadn't done anything with him yet, that guy was going to make every effort to do so. The week before she left on her trip with Jackson, we were in a silent tug of war over her job. Sarah is a determined person, and so am I. Neither of us wanted to give in or apologize her for her bad attitude and her flirtatious behavior, and me for accusing her of being too friendly with her boss. The weekend before her trip, her attitude toward me softened. She started speaking kindly during our meals. She came home on time, and if I didn't have supper cooking, she would fix us dinner. After work, she changed from her office wear into some casual shorts and cute tops. My frustrations were satisfied, but my suspicions were not. It was early Wednesday morning of her trip when she started packing her suitcase. At 9 o'clock sharp, the taxi came to take her to the airport. I wanted to drive her, but I had to work that day. I left a little late so I could hug her goodbye and wish her luck. Inside, I was dreading this trip, but by now there was nothing I could do. When her bags were loaded in the taxi, Sarah turned to me with a perplexed look. "Don't worry, Carl," she said. "I love you, darling. Only you. Thank you for trusting me. You have nothing to worry about." "I hope not. I love you too, baby. So much," I told her truthfully. "I'm gonna miss you a lot. Me too, my love. But please don't be jealous. Nothing bad will happen, I promise. It's just a business trip, nothing more. Before you know it, I'll be back home in your arms." As she drove away, there was a painful ache in my chest. Despite her promises, I knew that her terrible boss would be after her. He was not a good person and was just using my trusting wife. I only hoped she would realize it before he ruined our wonderful relationship. Wednesday night was tough. Sarah realized how worried I was and called me twice that day. Once when she arrived at her hotel, and again that evening after she had dinner with her coworkers. I deliberately didn't mention anything about her awful boss. We just chatted about how nice her room was and how excited she was to have a part in the negotiations with her clients. She said she appreciated the responsibility that her boss had given her and she would try her best. I just told her in a relaxed tone that was nice. Then we exchanged "I love yous" and hung up. I could hardly sleep at all that night. Thursday at work, I was useless. I made a few mistakes and my manager scolded me. I hated making mistakes. But I was so nervous about Sarah's trip I could hardly concentrate. My wife called me on my cell phone in the early evening. I kept telling her I loved her until she nearly started laughing at me. I loved the sound of her voice and I hated to hang up. By Friday, I couldn't take it anymore. My manager found a few mistakes I made and he wasn't happy. I told him I wasn't feeling well and he told me to leave because I was unproductive today. I left work early and went straight home. On the way home, I called Rybold Consulting and asked to speak to Trevon Jackson. His secretary told me he was unavailable on a business trip and he'd be back on Monday. I told her I was a friend of his family and wanted to give him an important message. She wouldn't give me his cell phone number, but she did let it slip what hotel he was staying at. It was a Residence Inn, and I quickly got the number from a Google search. I didn't have the money for a full investigation of my wife's activities on her trip, but I did have a credit card and enough available funds to charge an airline ticket for Saturday morning. I wanted to get one for Friday night, but they were all booked up. Since I knew Sarah would be there Saturday night, I figured that would be enough time to ease my fears that nothing was going on. At least I hoped so. I was nervous as can be on my flight. I caught the flight attendant giving me a suspicious look, probably wondering why I looked so jittery. Once I arrived, I rented a small car at the airport and arrived at the Residence Inn around 11 o'clock in the morning. Sarah led me to believe that she had meetings with her clients every day, including Saturday. That was why she couldn't return until Sunday morning. But when I got out of my car, I glanced over at the swimming pool and my heart nearly broke. There was my wife in a cute bathing suit, relaxing on a lounge chair next to her superior. On a small table by her chair was a tall drink, probably a fruit smoothie. Sitting very close to her side was Trevon, chatting and sipping a cold mixed drink of his own. They were with another couple. Probably the other coworkers that Sarah had mentioned would be going on this trip. By the way Trevon was leading the conversation, it was clear he was the head person. His voice was so loud it was easy to hear him from across the parking lot. He was telling my wife and the other couple an amusing story, and she was laughing like crazy. It was still morning, but she already seemed a little tipsy. I moved my car to the other side of the building and then walked back around to the entrance. Making sure that my wife and the others didn't notice me, I went inside to the front desk. I showed the female receptionist my driver's license and asked her for a room key to Sarah Sorensen's room. She checked to make sure I was her husband and then gave it to me. "Have a great stay with us, Mr. Sorensen," she said cheerfully. I hid my disappointment and replied, "I sure will," and proceeded straight to her room. What I found confirmed all of my suspicions. Sarah said she was sharing a room with another woman, but I could see that wasn't true by the open suitcases and all of the pants, ties, and suit jackets that were clearly men's clothing. I did recognize Sarah's clothes mixed in. The beds were already made up, so the maid had already been there. I looked out the window and had a clear view of the pool area. There were a dozen or so people in and around the pool. Just a few adults and kids, probably families. I watched Sarah and her group. She was sipping her smoothie and smiling as if she was having a great time. The other couple with them was similar, in that the woman was white and looked around Sarah's age, while the guy she was with was a considerably younger black man. I didn't know either of them, but assumed they were probably not faithful like Sarah. I gritted my teeth at how relaxed and comfortable my wife was around her colleague. I went back to the lobby and asked the receptionist if there was a sewing kit I could have. She directed me to a coin machine around the corner that had some emergency items you might need on a trip. Along with toothpaste, toothbrushes, nail clippers, and other practical items was a small sewing kit for emergencies. I quickly purchased it and went straight back to the room. I checked outside and saw that Sarah and her group of cheaters were still by the pool. Then I took a needle from the sewing kit and poked tiny holes. They were so small I didn't think anyone would notice. The last thing I did was to damage the curtain rod a little, making it impossible to completely close it all the way. Since her room was on the first floor, I had an idea I could get some video of them engaging through a small opening in the curtain. I checked it repeatedly, and when I finished, I was sure it wouldn't close all the way. I was hoping they'd be so eager that they wouldn't take the time to make sure the curtain was fully closed. When I left home, I just wanted to convince myself that Sarah was a faithful spouse, and I could calm down. Now that I found she wasn't, I wanted to do more to cause trouble on their trip. But I was so nervous they would return and catch me in their room I couldn't think quickly enough. If I had more time to think and plan, I could have done more, like setting up video cameras or stealing Trevon's company credit card and charging it up. Oh well, I had done a few things and I quickly got out of there before my presence was discovered. I moved my car to a more secluded spot and just sat there for a while. I could see the pool area and watched for another hour as my wife and that jerk drank, laughed, played in the pool, and basically acted like newlyweds. I didn't want to stay too long for fear something may go wrong. I was delighted when the four of them gathered up their towels and went back into the hotel. So I crept up to their window, started my video recorder on my phone, and held it up to the window. As I suspected, they were already together. It was broad daylight, so I knew I was taking a chance at being discovered. But I was only there for less than 15 minutes, and in that time, no one seemed to notice me standing there. I didn't look at my phone to see what I was recording because I didn't want to look too suspicious. I just acted like I was checking something out on the wall next to the window, and no one seemed to care. I went home and was sitting in my recliner watching TV when Sarah's taxi pulled up in front of the house. I'd been steeling my nerves all day to keep a normal appearance and not make her suspicious. When she entered the house, she seemed to be in a great mood. I got up and hugged her to welcome her back. She squealed, "Oh, my darling. I missed you so much." "Did you have a nice trip, honey?" I asked pleasantly. "Oh yes, it was nice. It was also very successful for our company. We managed to get them to sign an exclusive contract," she told me eagerly. "It was a nice trip, but I missed you so much." "I missed you too, Sarah," I lied. "I hope you did, sweetheart," she said in a suggestive manner. "I know this trip was tough for you, Carl," she continued. "I hated being away from you too. I'm glad you put up with me and I plan to reward you for your patience. I did miss you so much and hope you saved up your energy because I plan to make you very happy." "That's nice. I mean it. You just wait, baby," she said as she tried to hug me. At the last second, I turned around. That seemed to surprise her. She looked at me curiously but didn't mention it. "That's really kind of you, Sarah. Let me help you with your luggage," I said kindly. I removed myself from her embrace and picked up her suitcase, carrying it up the stairs to the bedroom. Sarah tried to hug me again, but I gently pushed her away. I left her room and allowed her to unpack on her own. She seemed a bit confused as to why I was acting distant. I had already prepared some food for her, and she was grateful. I suspected she had expended a lot of energy with Trevon and his friend. She told me about her trip and the meetings she attended, deliberately avoiding any mention of her boyfriend boss. I didn't particularly care for him, so I didn't bring him up either. She thanked me for not making a fuss about her trip and allowing her to gain valuable experience in business negotiations. I simply nodded and kept my true feelings to myself. I knew she would be tired after her trip with those guys, but I couldn't be certain if she would be sleepy enough to stop. Once we both finished our first glass, I refilled them. However, this time I discreetly added 2 sleeping pills to hers. She didn't even finish the second glass before she fell asleep. She tried to keep her eyes open and even made a slight move. By 10 o'clock, she was sound asleep. I left before she woke up the next morning. We didn't speak until Monday night when I thanked her. You mean?" she mumbled. I smiled and we hugged. Upon her return, I tried to act like a normal husband. It was incredibly challenging for me since I knew our marriage was heading for divorce. I had already decided that I could never trust her after her infidelity, and we were finished. I just pretended to be oblivious and engaged in casual conversation with her over dinner, discussing her day. Sometimes we made plans for the weekend, whether it was going out to her favorite restaurant or even going dancing a couple of times. We would talk about our jobs and our career aspirations. However, there was no more talk of her quitting her job or transferring out of Trevon's department. She didn't mention it either, and I was glad that I didn't bring it up anymore. After her weekend away, we resumed. I needed to keep things seemingly normal so she wouldn't suspect my plans. When we went out, I would hold her hand and open doors for her. When we were at home, I would give her back rubs or foot massages, and occasionally I would hold her and hug her. She appreciated those gestures. Almost a month later, she informed me that she was going on another business trip. I had to suppress my frustrations and maintain a steady demeanor. She was going to be unfaithful to me again. With a calm attitude, I purposefully avoided asking if Trevon was going with her. Since she didn't mention it, I assumed he was. I acted sad about her being away from home, but I wasn't as adamant about her not going as I was before her first trip. By now, I had accepted that she was continuing her affair, and no amount of pleading would change that. It broke my heart to see her throw away 14 years of a happy marriage, but there was nothing I could do about it. What Sarah didn't know was that I had already consulted a lawyer. I had gradually moved whatever money we had into an account under my name only. I was prepared to cut off our shared credit cards, cell phone service, and any other joint financial arrangements. She thought she was fooling me and that she could be with her despicable boss, but this time, I was prepared. I discussed with my lawyer the best time to serve her with divorce papers. He suggested we do it while she was on her trip. However, I decided to have it done before her trip, right at her office where all her coworkers could witness it. I still remembered the pitying looks they gave me during her company party. They all thought I was clueless, too oblivious to realize that some jerk was with my wife. Well, it was time to prove them wrong. Her boss lost his job on the same day she was served. Apparently, he had been transferred to Sarah's location after previously facing harassment allegations at his previous office. He was a well-known ex-athlete, and the CEO liked him, so they didn't want to simply terminate his employment. However, after my lawsuit, they decided to cut their losses and get rid of him. It took a couple more days before Sarah was also fired. It seemed too many people were aware of her affair, and the company was concerned about the public image of having such unfaithful employees on their payroll. I heard she tried to enter the house at one point, but as she began banging on the door, desperate to get in, one of our neighbors called the police. They were already aware of the restraining order against her. In order to avoid being arrested, she agreed to leave the premises. What caused even more commotion was when my lawyer insisted that our lawsuit be based on adultery. Initially, Sarah's lawyer argued that there was no proof of any affair and that it should be classified as irreconcilable differences. That's when my lawyer mentioned that he had already gone to court to request a test for Sarah. She was taken aback and fiercely denied being pregnant, even attempting to slap my lawyer for suggesting it. I simply sat there and chuckled. We still didn't show them the video footage of her with those two men in a hotel. We were saving that as leverage in case she did not comply with our demands. I requested a 60/40 split of our assets, with me receiving 60%. I also requested no alimony. Her lawyer smugly informed us that we would only receive half, and since I made more money than she did, alimony was almost guaranteed. We simply waited it out. 2 weeks later, we received a counteroffer from Sarah's lawyer. They confirmed that she was indeed pregnant, but insisted that I was the father and would have to provide financial support for the child. They also demanded a 50/50 split of assets and insisted on alimony, threatening to bring the matter before a judge if we didn't agree. In the meantime, her lawyer got the protection order lifted, and Sarah was allowed to enter our house with a sheriff to get her personal belongings. She also was allowed to get half of our money back. I agreed to both conditions. When she arrived at our house, my lawyer was there, but I wasn't. He told me that she was upset that I wasn't there because she wanted to talk to me. He just told her that wasn't the deal, and she had 1 hour to get her things and then get out. 6 weeks after she was served, I got a call from Sarah. Unlike the first time we spoke, this time her attitude was very conciliatory. "Hello, Carl. Can I speak to you, please? What is it? I just want you to know that I'm so terribly sorry for everything. I know it was all my fault, and I wish you would let me speak to you in person." "I don't think that's a good idea, Sarah." My lawyer says, "Oh, forget your lawyer, Carl. I'm your wife. At least for a while. Why can't we sit down and discuss the situation like adults? I know I messed up badly, and I'm so incredibly sorry for everything." There was a pause, and I could hear her sobbing a little. "You know I lost my job." "Yes, I heard. And now that everybody know about my affair, it's going to be really hard for me to find work. Everybody blames me, and oh shoot." I said I wouldn't cry anymore, but I let her cry for a few moments before I responded. "Sarah, we have nothing to talk about anymore. You wanted to betray your boss more than you wanted to remain faithful to me. I don't hate you for that, but I can't live with a woman that treats me so badly. How can I ever trust you again? You know this isn't the first time we've had this problem. I know, but I still love you. I miss you so much. Can't you just let me talk to you for a while? I know you loved me once. You could love me again. And think about our baby. I know it's yours. You're going to be a father, Carl. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Don't you want to take care of your child?" I let out a big sigh. I really did love her once. "Tell you what, Sarah. I know you're pregnant. Yes, I want to have your baby. We can work this out. Think about our child." "Okay. Hey. If my lawyer agrees, let's have a DNA test done. I don't want to give you any false hope of us working this out, but if the child is mine, that will change everything. I have to know." "Oh yes, honey," she exclaimed. "That's all I'm asking for. Just give me a chance to make it right. We can still be a family. I know I'm a little old to be a mother, but it won't matter if we're together. I promise to be the best mother and wife you'll ever see." "Okay, Sarah. I'll talk to my lawyer and set it up." "Oh, thank you, darling. Thank you. You won't regret this, Carl. You'll see. I love you so much." I hung up the phone. I know it was cruel, but I had to end this. Stringing her along would be even more cruel. There was no going back, and she needed to know. We found out a week later that the baby wasn't mine. I knew it all along, but I needed Sarah to know too. To say she was upset was an understatement. Wonderstatement. She called me again, but spent nearly the whole conversation crying and saying she was sorry. I just hung up on her. My lawsuit against her company resulted in a large cash payment, as long as I kept the details of my wife's affair quiet. My lawyer took a huge cut, but there was still plenty of money left over. I did send them information about the other two cheaters on that business trip. I heard later that both of them were fired too. I debated whether to find out if the other woman was married, but at this point, I was pretty disgusted with the whole thing and decided to drop it. On the date of our final divorce settlement, I showed up at the courthouse and saw my ex-wife. She was wearing maternity clothes, and her belly had swollen up until it was huge. She looked like she had gained 50 pounds. She saw me from across the room as she waddled into her seat by her lawyer. She waved at me and flashed a nervous smile. I just nodded and turned my attention to the judge. He ordered the divorce to go through the way it was written, which was for me to get the 60% and pay no alimony. I did feel sorry for Sarah because her boyfriend had skipped town, as I always thought he was a useless slacker. Now he was also a deadbeat dad. Despite her lawyer's efforts, they couldn't find him. When the gavel sounded, our divorce was final. No one really made out in the end. I loved my wife and hated losing her. I was probably too old and too sad at what happened to find another person who I could build a close, loving relationship with. Yeah, I'm just entering my 40s. But finding someone you can love and trust isn't that easy. I did date a few times, but nothing ever clicked for me. After a while, I almost gave up. Sarah didn't end up well either. After our divorce was final, she went into a deep state of sadness. We sold our house and split the profit 60/40, as was how our settlement decreed. The split left her with enough to get a small apartment, but the money was soon gone. She never had any education, and she now works in a grocery store, sweeping floors and cleaning toilets. Her parents are trying to help her out, but she hasn't been eating well. I heard later that she lost the baby due to bad health and maybe her age. I saw her once a while later and she looked terrible. I used to think she was attractive, but now she had a perpetual sad look on her face. Her hair's going gray, her body's skinny and shapeless. The harsh wrinkles on her face that used to be faint are now deep lines and make her look older than she is. I don't think I saw her smile once. A year or so later, I heard she has found a guy. That's better than me, as I'm still alone and bitter about it. They aren't living together. He's a lot older than her, but they do date sometimes. At least that's what I heard. I no longer have any animosity towards Sarah. Life has treated her badly. I do hope she ends up finding someone that can love and trust her. I know I can't. I know divorce stinks.